right now, Bitcoin has been breaking towards the upside, sharply reversing ever since we've been breaking towards the downside in towards the weekly open. And you can see right now that there's been a lot of headlines and a lot of news surrounding why we're pumping. So I'm going to be covering that in today's video. I have a lot of different charts also prepared for you guys, so make sure to be watching till the end. And with that being said, let's go straight away into the content. So as you can see, Donald Trump has recently announced just a few hours ago that he has plans to actually halt strikes on Iranian power plants and actually de-escalate the recent headlines that we've been seeing from the strikes that have been placed on LNG power plants. And you can see right now that Donald Trump has said that he's had talks with Iran recently regarding de-escalation, and this has actually caused a sharp reversal in markets. You can see that Bitcoin has actually had a sharp reversal, so has the S&P and the Nasdaq, and we've seen oil actually starting to come towards the downside now after going up for a lot of days. So at the minute, you can see that that's the reaction from the markets. However, you can actually see that the Iranian Foreign Ministry denies talks with Washington, and they actually accused Donald Trump of actually potentially wasting time here. So this is one thing to actually note. You can see that Donald Trump actually said that the talks happened last night, and he's saying that he's not sure why the Iranian media are denying that this has happened. So we need to keep a close eye on what's going to be happening in the next coming days, because of course, if there is going to be de-escalation, this is going to be very bullish for the markets, and of course the oil price is going to start to come down, which can indicate that inflation is going to start to come under control. And of course this may allow the Fed to actually cut rates in towards the future, but of course that's actually quite unlikely since we're still having a lot of uncertainty as to what Donald Trump's plans are for the future. So this is one thing that we need to be bearing in mind. But if you go into poly market, so the last time we looked at the probabilities of a ceasefire, you can see they've just changed there. It was about 7% for March 31st, and now they've jumped up to 21%, so about a 3x increase right there. And of course, you can see the probabilities of a ceasefire sooner are starting to increase. So this actually indicates that the market is a little bit optimistic here, and we've seen that response in the markets right now with Bitcoin pumping. You have your stock market pumping as well with the Nasdaq, and you have oil coming down. So the real question is this pump going to sustain? Are we going to continue towards the upside? Or is this just going to be a sell the news event where we have positive news and then it gets sold off in towards the rest of the week? So we need to be looking at price action to potentially give us any hints of what's likely to be happening. But of course, you can see that we've actually held this upward sloping trend line that I talked about in our previous video. And I did make it very, very clear that it's very imperative that we hold this upward sloping trend line, because if we were to start to break down, it is likely we're going to be repeating history, since we're at a deviation of the top side in our previous range over here. And you can see that led to a break towards the downside. And right now we have our range again where we've got a deviation of the top side. And I said if we do break this upward sloping trend line, it is likely we're going to be getting some follow through and we can expect lower prices. But as long as you hold it, we can expect that Bitcoin is potentially going to be bouncing, which we are seeing right now. So of course, it is likely that we can come further up in towards the 73k region. And if we actually come and take this high, I do think that that will be a great opportunity to be taking a short position for a potential move towards the downside again. So of course, you can see maybe something similar to this where you have your high, then your second high taken out before coming towards the downside. I do think that that's a scenario for us to be coming towards the downside, of course. And you may be wondering why I still think that we're going to be coming towards the downside. And the first reason is the fact that we're still at major resistance, and unless we break above 78k, then we're still more likely to come towards the downside, since this was previous resistance turning into support that's now resistance again. So of course, until we break above this decisively and retest it, I don't think that we're going to be seeing higher prices. I do think that most pumps are going to be getting sold into as we come towards the downside. And of course, you can see after every FOMC meeting, typically we have negative price action towards the downside. So even if we come up and take the high, I do think over the next coming weeks we are going to be heading towards the downside, of course. So this is one thing to be noting in mind. And of course, you can see that we're still in a market maker sell model, and this favors one more move towards the downside before we can entertain the idea of a bear market bottom, or at least reaccumulation. So my bias is still towards the downside. And we also noted that the S&P is creating somewhat of a rounding top. So if this starts to break towards the downside on the higher time frames, it's likely Bitcoin is going to see that leg towards the downside also. So of course, this is another reason why I do think that, of course, in the short term, we can see a move towards the upside to potentially take this high. But if we do actually come up, I'm not going to be getting too bullish, because I do think it's possible we can continue towards the downside. And of course, if we take a closer look at price action, so if I remove these lines over here and I go on towards the daily time frame, you can actually view this as somewhat of a bear flag. So of course you can draw your lines like this and your second line below it over there. And of course you can see that if Bitcoin actually gets a pump in towards 73k, it's possible that we can move towards the downside from this region, taking a high and just retesting the bear flag top before moving towards the downside. So this is another scenario that I do want to be keeping at the back of your minds. Now, of course, looking at that 2-week time frame, you can see that we still have majority of the liquidity below us. We did take out a lot of the liquidity, which potentially explains why we are bouncing as well on top of the news. And you can see that we do have a little bit of liquidity above, in and around 75k. But after that, there's not much liquidity above. So I do think that if we actually get a spike taking the high, it's possible that we will be coming towards the downside again. And as you can see again, looking at the ranges, every time that we've deviated the high in our range, we always traded towards the range lows. So it is very possible that even if we take the high or we just see a small move towards the upside, we're still going to be awaiting a move towards our range lows, since of course every time that Bitcoin has done this previously, we've actually seen this move towards the downside. So of course, combined with the market maker sell model that I've mentioned, I do think that Bitcoin is due another move down. It's just a question of, are we going to be taking the high and moving a little bit higher towards $73,000 before moving further down, or are we just going to be consolidating after this pump, and then for the rest of the week potentially we can be moving towards the downside again? Now, in that higher time frames, the trends are still down. We still have our EMA readings angled towards the downside and they're still red. So of course, again, any pumps that are coming in towards the market now, I still do expect price action towards the downside. And of course, combining that with the timing that we have historically seen, we can see that Bitcoin is still due for, further downside pressures if we are going to be focusing on the timings of the cycles, where typically we see 1 year of a bear market and then approximately 3 years of bull. We're about halfway in towards the bear market now, and we can still expect for the next 170 days approximately, we can be coming towards the downside. And of course, like I've mentioned, Ethereum is correlated to Bitcoin just with a higher beta. So of course, it's likely that if Bitcoin is going to be getting a short move towards the upside, we could potentially fill this gap for Ethereum before moving towards the downside again, and towards very interesting support levels for potential bear market bottom if we follow the market maker sell model again. And I do think that Ethereum is going to be a great steal in and around the $1,500 mark towards the $1,000 mark. I do think that that's a great zone to be accumulating long-term Ethereum. But of course, in a higher time frame, we are significantly down from our all-time highs. So it's a great level to be actually starting to dollar cost average in towards Ethereum, in my opinion, because in the next few cycles, I do think that Ethereum is going to be trading a lot higher than it is right now. But yeah, that'll be it for me. Make sure to be following me on X to be staying up to date with my updates, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a blessed rest of the day. Peace, guys. See ya. Bye-bye.